I don't like roguelikes or roguelites, and that's something that has been clear to me for a long time now. Believe me, I've given them a great chance, but not a single one has ever really stuck with me. I've tried all the big ones, Dead Cells, Spelunky, Enter the Gungeon, and even some smaller ones such as Death Road to Canada. Now, I'm not saying any of these games are bad. I know tons of people enjoy them, they're just not for me. Nonetheless, hate is a strong word, it just makes for a better title, as I would be lying if I had said I never had any fun with this genre of games. With friends, they can be a blast to play. One of my best friends absolutely adores these types of games, and I'm sure we've played over 10 hours of Spelunky, and it's not terrible. Because when I'm playing with others, I don't particularly care what we're doing, because it's more about the conversations and fun moments. But when I'm just playing by myself, like many roguelikes encourage you to, that's when things go downhill. I always have the need to feel a sense of progress when I'm playing something. This isn't a good thing, and I've been trying to work against it. But at the end of the day, if I sit down to play some games for a couple hours, I expect to feel like I accomplished something. There are, of course, exceptions. If I love a game so much, I might just keep on replaying levels and whatnot just for fun. Or, although I don't play them often, multiplayer games are almost always based around repeating the same stuff. Then there's roguelikes. Even though I've put many hours into multiple games of the genre, I've only actually beat 2 of them, and one is Crypt of the Necrodancer, and it took me like 3 hours. The other being what I'm here to talk about today. Supergiant's Hades is the first roguelike I've put tons of hours into and fully completed. Despite my distaste for roguelikes, I had a great time with this game and would easily recommend it to anyone. And why is that? Well, stick around and let's look at how Hades handles progression. Even though I'm sure everyone watching this has most likely played Hades already, here's a quick refresher for any of those who haven't. Hades, releasing in 2020, is a roguelike where you play as Zagreus, son of Hades, the lord of the underworld. Zagreus wants to escape the underworld by fighting his way through all sorts of creatures in top-down chaotic battles, even if for reasons unknown to the player at the beginning. Now, there's a lot of things that Hades does very well in the progression department. It doesn't just come down to a single design choice, but multiple building on each other that leads to a fantastic final product. In short, every escape attempt in Hades always has worth. Whether you lose on the first boss 5 minutes in or the final boss half an hour in, there's always something you got out of that attempt. And in Hades, this comes in the form of tangible resources or conversations with the great cast of characters. You see, a lot of roguelikes base their progression around experience and just getting better at the game. And while sometimes that is fine, there's a lot of cases when it can go wrong. It can lead to certain situations feeling completely unfair, since you're essentially destined to fail unless you understand how to get past a certain part. Or, for those with not a lot of time on their hands, it can take ages to ever even have a chance to get good enough to actually beat the game. I mean, in general, roguelikes are pretty notoriously difficult, since no one wants to beat them on like their first try. Hades does the pretty much perfect thing and bases most of its progression on the same difficulty principle, but also uses other smaller things to incentivize the player and make the game just a little easier. Is the reason I didn't enjoy a lot of roguelikes because I found them too difficult? Well, honestly, yes, I wouldn't consider myself insanely good at video games, but give me enough time and I can overcome pretty much any challenge. But with a game like Dark Souls, one of the things that kept me going was knowing that once I beat a boss or made it through an area for that matter, I'd never have to do it again, or would at least be a lot easier with new gear. But with difficult roguelikes, you have to repeat the same sections over and over again, and usually they don't get a whole lot faster or easier, unless there's some shortcuts or something along that line. and the later areas especially can be difficult and time consuming, so when you'd work your way through a whole bunch of bland easy rooms just to fail on the difficult part for the 10th time, it's frustrating to have to do it all again. Hades doesn't actually do a lot to fix this when I think about it. Most of it just comes down to the length of time it takes to complete a full run. I mean, my fastest time was just over 20 minutes, compared to me spending 40 minutes in Enter the Gungeon and not even making it close to the end. In general, Enter the Gungeon, in my opinion, has some of the worst design choices when it comes to roguelikes. It goes the exact opposite direction of what Hades is going for, and I'll bring it up again later. For now, let's return to the round-by-round progression. I've said this before, but sometimes it was actually pretty exciting to die in Hades. I mean, obviously I was initially pretty disappointed, but that was usually instantly overturned when I was sent back to the hub world because there's so much to look forward to. When you're exploring the underworld, you'll constantly be faced with choices on what you want to collect. There's numerous different resources, some that benefit you long term, or others that will help you out only on this one escape attempt. Not only is this a great dilemma that can make for some interesting consequences, but the sheer amount of stuff to do with all these resources is incredible. There's darkness that lets you gain permanent upgrades, gems that let you upgrade the House of Hades, nectar that lets you deepen bonds with characters, and more. There's so much variety that when you're sent back to the house, there is no way you'll not have something to be excited about. And even if you somehow manage to get no resources, each time you're sent back there's new opportunities to trade around items or, more importantly, have fun conversations with the residents. The characters and story are another massively important part of why Hades is so good. Before going in, I thought I already had pretty decent knowledge about Greek mythology based on lots of research I'd done myself. And Hades takes all these characters and just makes them really fun. The tone of Hades is pretty lighthearted, even if that doesn't particularly fit with the events of the story, but I didn't mind. The wonderful cast of characters is brought to life through pretty fantastic and expressive voice acting, and just an absolutely stunning art style. The interactions between Zagreus and all the different relationships he has and can build with everyone is really intriguing, not to mention rather genius from a design standpoint. The story is presented in a rather odd way. You'll sometimes end up with random cutscenes or interactions, but compared to the stories of other roguelikes, well, it's nice to have a story at all. Now, with a rather engaging narrative and defined clear goal for our main dude Zagreus, the last thing left to bring this game home would be the gameplay, and I'm glad to say that it definitely does. Right off the bat, I want to say that Hades is not an insanely hard game. Are you going to beat it on your first try? No, not at all. It does take a lot of experience and understanding to finally conquer over the underworld, but I escaped on my 15th attempt, which is pretty low for a roguelike. And once I beat it the first time, I went on to beat it like 10 times again in a row. And even if you are having a tricky time, there's even a setting that just makes the game easier each time you die. But like I mentioned earlier, the more attempts you make, the more resources you gain, the more upgrades you unlock, and therefore the easier the game gets. But those of you looking for a challenge, don't fret, you get plenty of options to spice things up once you've beat the game. Not to mention, you have to beat it multiple times to truly complete the story. So even if the challenge didn't always keep me on my toes, the combat as a whole is once again amazingly crafted. It's also amazingly chaotic. There's constantly loads of enemies and projectiles flying everywhere, something I tend to hate. Enter the Gungeon essentially does the same thing, but there's a big difference between the two. Hit points. Hades and HP is very forgiving. Not only do most attacks only do a small amount of damage, there's also multiple ways to revive yourself and easily heal bundles of health. Enter the Gungeon says no, and you can barely get hit at all or you lose. Getting hit by a single bullet can change the course of your entire run, which is why the unforgiving nature of Gungeon felt so frustrating. But in Hades, even if it's sometimes forgiving, don't expect anything super easy. Like I said, it did take me 15 tries to escape, so I clearly failed quite a bit. But luckily Hades also managed to keep me hooked through the massive amount of variety it poses in both playstyles and enemies. Enemy variety is great. All the different areas have different enemies who all pose different threats that lead to all sorts of small decisions over who to take out first, who to rush up to, and who to attack from a distance. Bosses and mini-bosses are also surprisingly varied. I mean, there's one mini-boss I hadn't even encountered until like my 20th escape attempt. Bosses are generally the easiest part of the game to lose all your HP at. Even the earlier bosses can be a threat if you're not prepared, so I always love facing them. And most of the bosses even have slightly different variations each round. Seriously, I cannot stress enough how much effort was put in to make sure every attempt was fresh. Now, if there's one thing I was initially worried about, it was the weapon variety and the implementation of boons, smaller upgrades exclusive to the single escape attempt on. Now, if there's one thing I was initially worried about, it was weapon variety and the implementation of boons, smaller upgrades exclusive to the single escape attempt you're on. Why was I worried about this? Well, because I'd had bad experiences with this sort of RNG stuff before. Once again, back to Enter the Gungeon. If there's one thing I learned by asking people how they first beat the game, it's that you have to get lucky. Getting a good or bad gun can essentially make or break your hour-long run in Gungeon, and that is solely enough for me to stop enjoying it. I don't mind RNG, but when the entire success of a round relies on it, that's a problem. So I was naturally worried that a successful round in Hades would rely completely on getting good boons, and I was luckily very wrong. Well, mostly wrong. Boons do play a very big part in the success of your run, but they would never absolutely be the deciding factor between a win and a loss, and that mainly comes down to the fact that you get a whole massive load of them. I mean, there's no way you can get all bad boons when you get so many. Of course, I did notice in my later time with the game that good boons did benefit me a lot. They could be the difference between barely scraping by a win or winning with multiple death defiances to spare. But I thought they were a great addition that once again adds even more variety to change up each round. And finally, there's plenty of weapons to choose from in the House of Hades, and each one is completely unique. I was legitimately surprised by how each weapon forced me to play more defensively, aggressively, or a combination of both. It's evident how much care was put into making each one feel completely unique. I personally tried to switch up my weapon after every round to keep the game feeling awesome, and that's definitely what I'd recommend doing. And now that we've gone over the huge amount of variety, that is about all I have to say. Hades is truly the roguelite that is nothing like a roguelite, or at least a very incredibly designed one. I'd easily give Hades an A, and I'm so glad it got all the praise it truly deserved. If you're like me and are contemplating buying Hades because you really dislike roguelikes, I'd for sure say to give it a go, because this game is designed for people like us. Thank you guys for watching, and sorry to trash and Enter the Gungeon so much. I know tons of people enjoy it. Anyways, make sure to check out some of my other videos if you enjoyed, and I hope to see you again. Bye.